Thick descriptions disrupts traditional educational methods. And why do we do that? Because we want to help humans thrive where they are, building better communities. One way that we do that is the Elephant in the Room Unboxed, where we give our audience members the tools and the resources to have those uncomfortable conversations and do it in a humane and anthropological way. We're doing this in partnership with Respect Diversity, another organization that is committed to doing the work with us. Each episode will have a different host and a different guest talking about uncomfortable conversations or uncomfortable topics and giving you the resources of how to navigate them. Let's get uncomfortable.
Hello, and welcome to the Elephant in the Room Unboxed podcast. I'm Veda Pai. I'm an anthropologist and your podcast host today. In this episode, our guest is Jorge Chavez, the current manager of outreach at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. He is also earning a master's in public history with curatorial and educational experience. We are so excited to have him on the podcast. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Hi.
So, just give me a little bit about what you want to add about yourself or anything that I missed.
No, you pretty much got it. Been in Oklahoma City my whole life, and kind of seeing it grow has been one of my favorite parts of being in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into our questions, is there anything specific about history that excites you, or anything that you want to share to our listeners about why you chose that specific field?
So when I started noticing this more in high school. I was never the best student, but I always got good grades, if that makes sense. And so that when you get that combination, some teachers kind of tend to either overlook some things that you do or not focus on you as much. And so for me was I found myself reading, and this is kind of nerdy now that I'm thinking about it, but I would read, so say we were talking about antebellum United States, right? I'd be reading, I'd skip ahead and read about Cold War, or read about I don't know, World War II, kind of just different things like that. And so it was still history based because I was in history class, and that's the textbooks that we had. But I often found myself not on the same page as everybody else, just because I got bored, or it just didn't really interest me. And so it was one of those where just certain stories didn't click with me. And so that's one thing that I feel like a lot of people don't understand is a part of history is it's people's stories, right? It's not only just factual events, facts or events. It's more of somebody's individual story and how that plays a role in the larger events and kind of facts that are so prevalent in the grade school level high history. And so when I was reading ahead and reading about World War II or Vietnam or the Cold War in general and stuff like that, I found that the stories were a little more captivating to me. And so then that's kind of when I realized that I liked that aspect of history, and that kind of helped me expand and grow a little more as a historian as a mindset. And then when I started grad school, I pretty quickly knew that I didn't want to be like a professor or anything of that nature. And then found that museums and public history was where I truly felt a connection and a way for me to utilize all my interest in people's stories and community stories and stuff like that, and then kind of engage with it actively instead of passively.
Yeah, I really like that. That sort of blends with what as an anthropologist, what I think about when I think about history is a lot of personal narratives. Obviously, there's major events and sort of, these huge wars and conflicts that happen. But in my mind, a lot of it is personal narratives. A lot of stuff that I read is people living in the space of World War II, rather than it just being about the specific battles or whatnot. It's more about how people lived and their perspectives of how they saw it. So I would agree with that, and I think that's really fascinating. So today's episode is, as you might have guessed, is about history, culture, and we're also going to be covering a little bit of archaeology as well, just to discuss its impact on society as a whole. So I have some questions here, and we'll see where our conversation takes us. But I wanted to see how you define history.
Yeah, so I kind of touched on it a little bit
Mm-hmm.
already. History, I think there's like your technical term, like your technical definition, and then you have your more how I see it personally.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like your technical is more of like a recollection of certain events, um, facts, people, individuals, and so forth, but from a very specific perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how you get to your people who kind of focus on very niche sets of history. So people who
Mm-hmm.
study um, Native American involvement in the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's very different than somebody who may study uh, the German and German American uh, perspective on the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of just those little different
Mm-hmm.
things, right? Uh, and so, kind of going off of that, for me, I see history as individual stories that
Mm-hmm.
connect and weave and add context to uh, those historical events,
Mm-hmm.
people, figures, and movements.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, kind of attaching more on the perspective side of it is kind of being understanding that it's a very specific perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a historian writing in the United States is
Mm-hmm.
different than a historian writing in Germany, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so those different perspectives, while they may have different uh, philosophies that they follow when looking at the archives, when looking at the primary sources and stuff like that, all of that will, if even if they're studying, say, uh, American involvement in World
Mm-hmm.
War II, they're coming at it from two different
Right.
perspectives, right? And so
Right.
they may come to different um, conclusions and different trains of thoughts, and develop different theories and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, that's kind of like the mainstream history, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I always try to take a step back and focus on individual stories and how they connect, and um how they connect to the present. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's always, that's the thing about history, is that people always think it's a very distant or different place.
Mm-hmm.
And it more often than not, it is a continuation or a response to things that happened in the
Mm-hmm.
past.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always, people always try to say like, oh, that was a different time period,
Right.
but you will never get rid of those lingering kind of just
Mm-hmm.
ideologies, mentality sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Mm-hmm.
will always kind of linger, and I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they change over time, but just knowing that you can't like say, oh, that was a different time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I see history. May have gone on a little tangent.
No, no. I mean, I think it's very applicable into how people. A lot of people only know about history in like school and what they've
Mhm.
received. They only know like the textbook, and obviously the textbook might have been written exclusively by American authors, and that might look different than, like you said, like if somebody else in another country or from another background wrote, like if they wrote history, how they might perceive it. So when you're talking about like personal narratives or like life stories, I think that's really important to include because, like you said, you know, they are sort of they're sort of a blueprint and really impact how we perceive things today. It's not something as simple as just letting it go,
Mhm.
right? So that's really important when we're considering how to talk to other people, how to consider historical debates. I know I've faced that too. And this kind of goes into my next question. And you kind of answered this in my mind, but how is your perception of history different from public history specifically?
Mhm.
Or is it similar. Like it's sort of the same definition, but like executed in a different way. Or
Mhm.
how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so for me personally, when I think of history, I do think of your more mainstream. So, and when I say mainstream, it's just what most people understand as
Mm-hmm.
history. And so, when you're in grade school, is usually, yeah, your history class,
Mm-hmm.
say Oklahoma history, world history, U.S. history,
Mm-hmm.
just different types of history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Comes with a textbook, comes with a set of pre-selected primary resources,
Mm-hmm.
different ideas, theories, kind of movements, topics that are already more or less pre-selected. and kind of just presented to the students to ingest. And then if the teacher does the right, I mean, what I feel, if they do their job properly, the students are well informed and well instructed enough to critically think about that history, right? And so then that's when you kind of get into your upper level in college courses and grad school, and you focus very in depth on not only the subject, so the content, but also then you start expanding on, okay, so this recollection, this history of the Civil War was written in 1930. How do different factors play into how that book or I forgot what they're called, monographs or just a book that focuses on one thing, right? But if it was written in 1930, how is that different than something written in 1999? So just kind of seeing expanding those, right? And then that's kind of when you get to your college courses and stuff like that. And so public history is more of a so history is very like academic in my mind, very academic, very structured, very, there's already like set pre-selected things for students to kind of read and kind of just digest in their brains, and then hopefully they have the skills and tools to dissect and really think critically about what they're being presented, and maybe, and then that's how they kind of build off of it. And so that's why somebody says, was like, there's only so much you can write about history, right? Because it already happened. There's already like an established way of thinking of it and stuff like that. But what people don't realize is that when you prepare students well enough, their perspectives, whatever background they come from or whatnot, will somehow seep into the way they see history, and then those little things will let them say, "Oh, okay." So, for example, I have a friend who focuses on the German and German American impact in Civil War, and that's one thing that like I had no idea about, because when you're learning about the Civil War, you kind of just focus on the big battles, big generals, big economic, social, cultural aspects that led to the Civil War. But then the way he kind of explained his interest and what led him to specifically the German influence within the Midwest, because he's from the Midwest, and so that's something that he connected to, right? And so that's something that I never thought. It opened my eyes to, oh, that is what history is, right? And so that's your academic stuff, right? So you kind of lead that path, and that's how you can write a million different things about the Civil War, because you can find one little facet and just explore that. But when it comes to public history, that's more of your engaging with a public audience, and by that I mean not your standard academic college student, college professors type, right? You have somebody who by day they are a banker, and they just have an interest in World War II because their grandfather was in World War II, kind of different things like that. And then so that's kind of how you, the most the public history that I see the most accepted, or the most that people really understand, are like your historical documentaries, things like that. So like it's the one where, like, say they focus on the JFK assassination, right? And so they expand on that and they dramatize it a little bit and stuff like that. So that's a bit of public history. But more of what I really enjoy doing and kind of thrive and really enjoy doing is kind of just bringing, presenting historical facts and maybe stories that aren't in your textbooks, and kind of perspectives that are usually ignored or kind of just brushed aside, and bringing those to the forefront, right? And so that's kind of what I see museums as. I see them, and this may be like just a little side tangent. A lot of people have issues with museums because they can directly be traced to the colonial settler mentality and framework, right? It started with a bunch of Europeans landing somewhere, taking over the place, taking notes, taking artifacts, taking pieces of other people's culture, taking it back to say England, and then showcasing it for people and say, oh, this is what we discovered. This is how they live. This is their currency. This is all of this, right? And it became like a spectacle. And so you still have traces of that in today, and so that's why some people are very hesitant or have issues with museums as an idea. But for me, I see museums as an open forum, and it just depends on how you use them, right? There are some institutions that kind of do play on that spectacle aspect of it, and I'm not. I mean, everybody kind of has their own mission and ways of the story that they want to tell. But me personally, when I think of a museum or what a museum that I want to work for, is a place for people to come together and tell their stories, and then bring that story to a public setting where other people can kind of engage with it directly, right? And so it's not so much, oh, we have an exhibit on Mexicans in Oklahoma, right? It's also having that exhibit, but also having several public events where people can kind of come and say, I mean, in playing on that spectacle aspect of it, maybe you do bring some fun parts of that culture, right? So you bring in music, you bring in food, you bring in different aspects that people just find interesting, right? But also maybe have a panel where people talk about that history. People talk about the early discrimination, the early kind of sense of having to hide your identity to blend in for safety, for whatever reason, right? To be able to get a job, to be able to earn a living for your family and having to assimilate, and then maybe talk about the growth where the community switches and is like, okay, well, I think we're big enough where I can still be true to myself and provide a living for my family and feel safe. And so having that conversation alongside the food, the music, alongside the exhibit, that as a whole is kind of what public history is. And how that's, to me, that's a way more engaging and also just more fun way to view history than somebody who maybe they thrive in the archives and thrive in writing very academic, very theory, very just scholarly work, right? And so those are two different things, and I feel like we need both because a lot of the public history is informed and supported by the academic history, right? If without the academic history, we don't have the public history. But it's also, if you don't have that public buy-in and that public interest to openly discuss history and openly want to search for new histories, right? New perspectives, new stories, then that academic history will begin to die down and really be not diluted, but like lose, in essence, the motor behind it, right? You can't have all these books written if nobody's really interested in it.
I love that. You sort of answered some other questions that I had, which
Sorry.
no, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. I was just thinking about like what are some benefits and positive aspects to public history in the way that it's conducted, and what are some maybe cons to public history that you may not see in what you know, like a general history description of like a very structured academic space. I just was thinking about how, you know, that might be a position that you might think of.
So yeah, the pros, I mean, I feel like you just get more buy-in with like public things. It's more accessible, so somebody doesn't necessarily have to be college educated to understand what's going on, understand the stories, understand all that sort of things, right? And that's one thing that I really struggled with in like my classes particularly was, to me, history, like the way I saw it was like, oh, it's like a story of what happened, right? And then people started getting into like the theory behind movements and kind of the theory of how to tell that story and stuff like that. And that became really confusing and was really hard for me to grasp and understand. And so public history allows to take a step back from the high theory, high minded conversation, and kind of take a step back and kind of look at just the facts, right? And look more along the lines of what actually happened, how did this impact people? Because when you're talking about theory and stuff like that, very high minded stuff, you kind of lose that personal aspect of it. And so you're like, oh, the Gilded Age, just a lot of businessmen were working with congressmen, make a lot of money, right? But then you lose that sense of like the working class. Say, for example, people working in the mines, people working in the factories, the horrific work conditions that they had. So like say maybe somebody lost 2 fingers in the morning, but by the next week they had to be back because they couldn't feed their family, right? And so I feel like when you focus on that like high-minded theory and stuff like that, you lose those stories, which are also important to tell the story, right? Because I could easily say, oh, they had horrible working conditions, but when you talk about, say, a father of 3 kids who lost some limbs, but then immediately had to get back to work because he needs to provide food for them, that adds a level of humanity and understanding that sometimes is hard. And so I think that's a pro of public history, is that you get to really engage with those stories. I mean, and also like if you talk about the personal drive of, say, one of those barons who started maybe not wealthy, they came from like dirt poor, and then through maybe some lucky connections, meeting the right people, they made a name for themselves and so forth, right? That story still counts. And so but again, you lose that when you just focus on the theory and not so much the actual story. And so I think that's the pro of public history. But for a con, I think the easiest one is just some people don't want to talk about certain things. Some people don't want to engage with that history because it's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's at times like gut wrenching. But at the same time, it could also be beautiful. It could be inspiring. It could be eye opening, right? And so it's just hard when some people don't want to honestly and earnestly and respectfully engage with it, because then you could easily have a great conversation with somebody about history, about the like terrible things that have happened all around the world, and learn from it, right? Or you can just say no and just walk away, or be disrespectful and be like not ignorant, but in the sense of like you don't know the full story. You kind of have this thing that you've thought was your truth for so long, and when somebody gives you evidence or lets you know that, oh, what about this perspective, right? How that can challenge somebody, and instead of being open to that challenge and actually, because it's okay to defend, like, say your whole life you thought one thing, right? And then somebody comes back and challenges you a little bit, and you're like, no, that's not true. Like, my parents told me this, my grandparents told me this, and then you just you get like you build a wall in front and between you and the person you're talking to, and so then that way you can't have that open dialogue and kind of learn from it. You kind of just close yourself off. And so some people just don't want to do that, and some institutions don't want to open that up, or be open to that scrutiny of, oh, why are you guys talking about this? You are you're making certain people feel bad, or you're telling the wrong side, or different things like that. And I feel like that's a pretty big con of public history. And when people engage with public history, that's always a thing of like pushback and resistance to just having that conversation in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this. I worked in like national museums and stuff like that before. And obviously there's always a lot of pushback depending on what people believe and what they've been told of like the stories within their family. So that's always really hard. And that kind of gets into like my next couple questions. So, when people come to like public history and they're confronted with something that they may feel uncomfortable by, they're like, oh, well, what I learned is the truth, right? I feel like the word truth is oftentimes used a lot in history. And I find that word really fascinating because I'm wondering, can there be multiple truths present at once? And like, how do you honor that? Like when you're just, if you're having this hypothetical situation of, somebody who is feeling uncomfortable and in a vulnerable position because they're being told that their history and their facts are either being contradicted or they're being shifted in a different perspective. How do you validate the fact that there are multiple truths and it's not necessarily like black and white, right?
I mean, personally, I feel like there is no truth. Truth is more of an idea that we, or a designation that we attach to certain things that we believe. And this could extend from just the religion, your maybe your political background, maybe anything, right? We can attach that designation to anything, and it could be true. It's one of those things where there is that's the complexity and I think virtue of being human, that there is no absolute truth and there is no like we can have two truths and they two opposite truths and they can still be so you can have two things that two people feel are true and they can be true at the same time and wrong at the same time. And so focusing on like historical things, it's so people, like one thing that I know is so Porfirio Diaz, he was a dictator in Mexico from about 1877 to about 1910. He was one of those individuals who brought a lot of progress to Mexico. He brought railroads, nationalized a lot of mining, a lot of industries, and brought in a lot of money to Mexico. And it grew as a not only cultural hub, but economic hub and political hub. It became a very structured and very powerful country at the time in the area. And but at the same time, he deprived a lot of people of economic growth. Nationalizing a lot of the industries made it really hard for everyday people to make a living, and so forth, right? And they also took a lot of land from indigenous people, and so he's one of those complicated, very controversial figures in Mexican history. And so that is the truth, is like he brought a lot of progress to Mexico. At the same time, he regressed in indigenous rights. He regressed in the working man's rights. And so kind of that duality of man is ever present. And so it's one of those things where World War I, for example, people always blame Germany. They put all the blame, all the financial responsibility and burden on Germany. But people forget that before World War I, the Prince of England would marry the Princess of Germany or the Princess of France or the Princess of Russia. Like it was a very interconnected, very, everybody knew each other. They were all cousins. They were all related to each other somehow. And so it's one of those where like, how can, if we're all playing the same game, it's just one person lost, and so everybody blamed them, right? It was a scapegoat. And then that kind of led to the rise of Hitler and his ideology and all the atrocities that happened from there. But if you look back at it, some of the Germans did have a right to feel cheated, to feel that discontent for why did we get the short end of the stick? And again, very controversial, very complicated topic to really discuss, but at the same time, it's like a lot of those Germans felt like they were just protecting their country.
Right.
They very much felt the same way as the German. The Germans very felt the same way as the English or the French or the Americans or the Russians or everybody involved, right? It was in my eyes, one of the most like destructive for the just for culture, for society, for humanity. It was a very destructive war alongside the buildings, the lives, and everything. But at the same time, to me, it felt like such a not useless war, but unneeded. A lot of the things that happened in World War One, and that's not my area of focus, so I may be misunderstanding a few things. But to me, it was just everybody trying to see who's the biggest person in the room.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And it just felt like a very selfish war. And they sacrificed. I mean, they call it like the lost generation. A lot of the men and women that came back from the war completely changed. Right. If they were once a really happy, athletic person during the war, they may have grown depressed, lost a limb, stuff like that. Right.
Yeah.
And so that sense of like, oh, it was the war to end all wars, right? It was the truth. Like that was what people believed on both sides, right? So the Germans and the English and the French, they were fighting to protect their way of life, right? But when you look back at it, they had very similar ways of life.
Right.
The only thing that changed was, oh, I am adhering to the German government instead of the English government. But the people lived the same way. They had similar traditions, similar lifestyles, and so it's one of those where like, how can you be so against somebody who is so similar, right? And so that's that truth and not truth.
Yeah. So those truths sort of, or lack of truths that you talk about is sort of like, it's not as simple as like one perspective, right? So you can't really boil it down to one perspective. And you have to sort of consider the cultural context of what's happening. I think that's really big too. And that anthropology really focuses on that as well. That cultural context is huge and you need to have that in order to understand a lot of things. That doesn't necessarily sort of allow very harmful experiences to go off to the wayside, but it sort of provides that additional context to understand why people were acting the way they were and also understand why people were harmed the way they were and also still condemn it. So that's also something that I am thinking about in my next couple of questions is what are some ways we can discuss unknown histories rather than relying on dominant and possibly violent/harmful narratives? I'm thinking about the truthful conversations happening around the Tulsa Race Massacre and how we can confront the history of racial violence in Oklahoma without placing blame or denying opinions. I really want to focus on that because I feel like when people are having conversations specifically around very violent histories, a lot of people can feel very vulnerable in the ways that it's discussed. We sort of talked about how when people have their truths sort of confronted, that can feel very vulnerable, and being emotionally vulnerable to that is really difficult. So I think I'm wondering if in your public history experience, like your current position or whatnot, how you sort of dealt with these difficult conversations and allowing multiple things to be true while also elevating unknown histories. And not feeding into a very, perpetuating very intense, like violent narratives that sort of leave history as a past instead of considering like that history also is being created day by day. So I was wondering if you could build on more tangible moments of like how you've seen that play out, of how you've recognized. I'll say that I believe in like multiple truths can be present at once. I don't necessarily I think I just have a different perspective. So I think multiple truths can be present at once. And so like when you're talking about these multiple narratives, I think it's important to understand how different people perceive that. And I wanted to see if you had any tangible knowledge or anything you can add into how you've experienced that.
I mean, the fact that we're talking about the Tulsa Massacre is, it was once seen as an unknown history. It was it was something that people didn't talk about, didn't want to talk about, didn't want to bring it up. And I went to the Greenwood Rising Center in Tulsa, in Greenwood, And it was one of those where like people didn't want to talk about it from both sides, right? So your people, your African American community didn't want to talk about it because it was a terrible time. Like, people lost their whole livelihoods in one evening, lost their loved ones in one evening, and it was just such a dark time for them that they just wanted to forget about it. And on the flip side, you had a lot of the white people who were very active participants, or just passive people who didn't stop it or didn't actively do anything to protect their neighbors and so forth, were guilty. They felt that guilt of like, we raised a whole community for a simple misunderstanding. And so you have different opinions, but the same thing of not talking about it. And so when it comes to talking, and this happened much later, where more and more people were beginning to actually just actively have that conversation, that it became to the point where I'm pretty sure it's like, I'm not sure if it's a standard, but it's like, it's talked about now. Like in Oklahoma history, it is a big talking point now, where once it was a paragraph, if that, in a textbook. And so, and that kind of also comes from, so I know you mentioned like having very specific things. It's also one of those where like, I feel like we're in a better position to discuss certain things like that, because people are understanding the like, you remember how I said the higher the theory that came, like the established theory. More people are beginning to challenge that, and really add more nuance to that theory. And so what happened in Tulsa was terrible, but it didn't only happen in Tulsa. It happened all over the South, right? There was lynchings, there was rioting all across the states, right? And that's something that people tend to hide, tend to not be open to, because it's one of those where maybe it was their grandfather or great grandfather doing these things. Part of the mob, part of the people throwing stones, part of the people yelling and looting and setting things on fire and stuff like that. And other people, it's like their personal family story. Like, say somebody lost their sister, and so even decades later, it still kind of haunts them. And being able to have that discussion is very tricky. It's very hard to do. And I think it's also one of those where like you have to, as a, like in a public setting, and the public history aspect of it, you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware of those feelings that are attached to that history, right? And especially here in Oklahoma, that and I'm very glad that it's an open and very openly talked about thing now. But at the same time, it's like, this is somebody's personal story at the same time, and being able to engage with it with that sense of compassion and empathy is needed. And so, I am I answering your question?
Yeah, you are. So you're sort of getting there, where it's you're leading with a lot of empathy and compassion when discussing these things, and sort of honoring the ability to be vulnerable. Because obviously, if we're referencing specifically the Tulsa Race Massacre and history of racial violence, I think honestly there's a lot of guilt and a lot of insecurity and a lot of pain, obviously, surrounding it. And I know I grew up in Richmond, and that is it's a former Confederate capital. We had huge during a lot of Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. The most famous statue in the city of Robert E. Lee got torn down. And that is a figure in itself of enslavement and racial segregation is huge. And also, I don't think that would have happened without people being open to being vulnerable and having these conversations. But that doesn't mean that it's not an ever-evolving process, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't go sideways sometimes. So I think you mentioned a really good point of like, allowing people to be vulnerable and sort of leading with that empathy and compassion and going at it with the goal of allowing for multiple histories to be true and multiple personal narratives to be present. And I think that's quite important when we're discussing how people can discuss just like the topic of history, whether it be family history or whatnot. It's not just, you know.
And then that always goes back to the ability of humans to see each other as humans. And it's one of those things where I think people, and when it comes to the guilt and feeling as if you're for some reason responsible for it. I know like one big thing is the whole conversation on CRT and indoctrinating students and stuff like that. Personally, I see critical race theory as a very graduate level course.
Yeah.
It's very high level. It's like a legal class that you take in grad school if that's what you want to pursue. And so I think the manipulation of the word CRT and they're equating it to studying bad moments in history as making people feel bad for who they are. I think that's just a misunderstanding or an intentional manipulation of the word and making people feel a certain way, right? Yeah. And so kind of it's to me, having these difficult conversations and acknowledging that, like, hey, say, this is just funny. Well, not funny, but it's just a weird connection. So I'm not a big, I don't like the Dallas Cowboys, and so any reason that I find to add on to that makes me laugh. And so, for example, I don't know if it's true or whatnot, but there was a big rumor lately that Jerry Jones was seen like yelling at an African American person when he was a teenager or something along those lines. So there's a big debate on that, and it's one of those where, like, well, yeah, like, I mean, it like, if you think about it, he would have been safer being part of the masses than standing up against, right? And so we will never know what was going. If that was really Jerry Jones, we never know what was going through his mind. And then I am sure that in the years since, he's grown and really become more empathetic and open to these conversations, and to understanding that if that was him who was in that photograph, that what he did was wrong. But I also, like, just going back to the humans, allowing humans to be humans, is people make mistakes, right? No matter, like, people say, like, you want to be on the right side of history, and in a way, there is no right or wrong side of history. There is just those who happen to win at this specific time and those who happen to lose at this specific time. And so that sense of, like, oh, you're making our kids feel bad because they're white, I don't see it as true, because if that student feels no sense of, like, racist feelings or ideology or anything, then what's being told has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it's like it like I don't mean to go back on, oh, it's a different time, different people, but it's at the same time, it's like it really wasn't you. Like, your 8-year-old kid had nothing to do with what was happening during integration. And it's important for them to know that happened, and to acknowledge it as a historical movement that our society went through.
But it's not something that should be used as, like,
but it has
a tool to condemn them.
Yeah, it has nothing
existing.
it has nothing to do with them. Nothing they've ever done in their life has a connection to that.
Yeah.
Maybe
it might be a lesson on how to treat people with more empathy.
And so it's like that sense of, like, we're making our kids feel bad. No, we're making them well informed, making them understand that, yeah, these are uncomfortable things that have happened, and that's why you should know and prevent them from ever happening again.
And then you can use your tools of empathy and you being a kind human to, combat those things, not necessarily, like, you being implicated in that. So I think that's interesting. I think I have different perspectives when it comes to, right side or wrong side of history necessarily, but I think it's also hard. I mean, I sort of specialize in, like, the anthropology of human rights, and that stuff gets really, like, especially with the vagueness of human rights law, like that gets really complicated, and people being like, well, how do you prosecute this? And how do you do this? And how do you perceive one human rights violation in a culture, and when another culture might not think of it as a human rights violation? And there's no real way for you to dictate that. Like, it's really difficult. So it's very hard, and it's very emotionally draining to like sort of think about all that stuff. So I think it's leading with empathy, and I think going from that, I think that's really important. And also all the conversations around CRT, like I think specifically that label gets tossed around a lot. And I think when you're actually considering it as an intellectual theory, obviously I don't think 8-year-olds are going to be understand. Like, I think that is completely out of their
capacity.
Yeah, like I wouldn't expect them to understand that. So it's like, I think it's interesting to have that perspective, especially in like an educational setting. So I'm just going to sort of go towards our last couple questions here. And these are some sort of like imaginative questions that I came up with. But if you could create a perfect curatorial / educational experience to display to the public, what would you choose and why? And is there a specific topic that you would focus on? We've sort of discussed this, but like, why is it important to showcase different voices?
I would do. Let me see. I would do the. This one's a little close to home, but the growth and development of the South Side, the as an area, the evolution of the image and perception of the South Side, as it developed, like as it went from a mostly white neighborhood to a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood.
You're referencing the South Side of Oklahoma City.
Yeah, South Side of Oklahoma City. Sorry, yeah. And so how that transition happened, and how people who now make it their home, how their identity is very present and unapologetic. And so I would kind of talk about put together something about that. In the sense of, when I was in 8th grade, he was my 8th grade English teacher. And he told us stories. He went to, I believe he went to U.S. Grant, but he had a lot of friends at Capitol Hill. And Capitol Hill was my like neighborhood high school. I didn't attend there, but it was my neighborhood high school. And so kind of hearing his perspectives on it and all the things that he did as a kid, and back when it was a white neighborhood. But the South Side that I know has always been very predominantly Hispanic. There's taco trucks everywhere, or not everywhere, but pretty frequent. Yeah. There's restaurants, stores, what do you call it? Dealerships, kind of just different things like that. But they all have that, like, their name is in Spanish, right? And
they
so they're
cater
not
to that community.
Yeah, they're not hiding who they are and stuff like that. And so I think that's a really interesting story to tell. Mostly because Oklahoma City has never really been put into that conversation of how Hispanic communities grow. There's a really I think there's a really interesting book called Barrios America.
I think I heard about that.
And it focuses on the growth of the Hispanic communities in both Dallas and Chicago. And so in Chicago, I think it focused on Pilsen. And then in Dallas, the Oak Cliff, I think, neighborhoods, and that all ties into white flight and families moving in, and then it extends into modern times with gentrification and stuff like that. And so that's kind of my way of inserting Oklahoma City into that wider conversation. And at the same time, also having like maybe oral histories, like little vignettes or videos playing, highlighting a specific thing. I know I have some experience with oral history, and I remember one of the stories that like really stuck with me was she's currently, I think the way she sees it, she's a teacher that teaches teachers. Try saying that 3 times. She's a professor at UCO. And one of her stories was, as a kid, she and her family had a mariachi band.
Mhm.
and they would play at like cantinas, quinceañeras, everything, right?
Mhm.
And her thing was, it was really funny, or not funny, but like they had to sneak her into a lot of these places because she was she was underage.
Mhm.
But she still wanted to play with her family, and so she was an integral part of that mariachi band. And so they had her, like her mariachi band had her niche, right?
Mhm.
But then there was maybe a norteña band
Mhm.
that they were friends with and they knew
Mhm.
about, or they had somebody who did like your Tex-Mex style,
Mhm.
and cumbias and stuff like that. And so that it was kind of like a little circuit where
Mhm.
each band had their own little niche and they had their own shows. And then often on a Friday, the norteña band would play, and then on the Saturday, the mariachi band would play,
Mhm.
and on Sunday it'd be the cumbia. And so
Mhm.
like that little
Creation of a community
yeah, that little
around
community within the
this
bigger
background, right?
community
Yeah,
was really interesting to me. And I feel like some like stories like
and
that.
also have factors into like U.S. history
Mm-hmm. and
broadly.
and so I feel like little vignettes
Yeah.
of stories like that would be really cool. um and then what was your other question?
Why is it important to showcase different voices?
I think it's always
Kinda
like
covered that.
it's one thing that I live by is they say like if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Mm,
And I don't see it like smart as in the sense of like, oh, I'm the most educated,
right.
I have the most certifications or degrees or whatnot. But that smartness or intelligence can come from just lived experiences.
Right.
And maybe and that also is not attached to age or anything
Yeah.
like that. Somebody who's 30 years old may have as much experience as somebody who's 50 years old.
Right.
And you always have um, room to grow.
Mhm.
And so kind of based on that mentality of like being the smartest person in the room
Mhm.
is you're in the wrong room.
Right.
And I feel like if people began to look at it that way,
Mm.
and take that sense of ego and pride
Mhm.
aside from it, um, and you just open yourself up to have more open and interesting conversations with people that you may not think that you have anything in common with. You might find something in common,
Mhm.
or something, or conversations with people you think you have something in common,
Mhm.
and then once you really dive into it, you guys are pretty opposite.
Mhm.
And so,
Mhm.
I think that's that's kind of what I see as like
Yeah.
as a not necessarily like, oh, I'm gonna gain something from this, but just a new perspective, a
Mhm.
new way of looking at things.
Mhm. Yeah. I think that sort of factors in what I'm thinking about for our last question here. With making public history more accessible and easier to understand, if we're coming at it from a perspective of like everybody has something to offer and expertise isn't necessarily something that's, labeled through degrees or certifications or a level of high understanding theory, that everybody can come in and bring a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge to a different perspective. I find knowledge can be such a broad category, and it does
Mm-hmm.
not have to be something that's super based in like I'm an expert. I have a level of prestige. And I think when thinking about how to make public history more accessible and easier to understand, I feel like that's definitely something by making it known that like
Mm-hmm.
everybody does have knowledge to bring to the conversation.
I think the easiest way is for people to understand that I find it very hard to claim myself as a historian
Mm-hmm.
or public historian. But I think it is important to see yourself as a historian of sort. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you, in a very basic way, if you keep a diary or
Mm-hmm.
keep a journal and keep track of what goes on every day in your life and stuff like that, in 50, 60, maybe 100 years, that's a primary source document.
Mm-hmm.
People don't really think about it, but like we're reading Thomas Jefferson's letters
Mm-hmm.
to Benjamin Franklin. They could just be talking about what they want to do when they meet up.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a text message that we see nowadays,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But the fact that it's written, we treat it as this holy grail of a primary source
Mm-hmm.
document.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because of that
Right.
idea behind it, right? So if you see yourself as a public historian who just takes note of maybe,
Like rewriting how we see
yeah,
it.
rewriting, yeah. And so if somebody takes a journal and writes what happened during the day, or say they see the news and kind of in their own perspective really process it and then take
Mm-hmm.
that down,
Mm-hmm.
in that is now a primary source document.
Right.
And so taking that, like you said, prestige out of it, and letting people know that you are doing this on a daily basis, that will get more people to actively participate, because they are like, oh, I am doing this now. I can do this in public.
And
or
my
I can
word
do
has
this.
meaning, and I'm allowed to infer in the conversation.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. I think it's really important when discussing, especially with this podcast, when people talk about, like, listen to this podcast, and I've had friends being like, oh, well, you know, I don't talk about my thesis project or whatever. But we've had a number of different people on this podcast, and I think it is like, it shows how accessible it should be, right? So amazing. Thank you. I think that was a great conversation. Do you have anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
No. Yeah, I think I've said a lot.
Yeah, you said a lot of great things.
Yeah,
so.
and yeah, I think I'm out of things to say right now. But I hope that the people who listen to this can take something from it and start to see themselves as historians and as public historians, and that their voice counts, and that we, like you said, I think you're the one that said it, like, we're making history every day. Whether you know it or not, it's gonna be in a textbook in about 20 to 30 years. So might as well take ownership of it and help write it.
I mean, the pandemic's already listed in the textbook, so it's pretty crazy to think about that. But yeah, so thank you so much for Jorge to joining us on the Elephant in the Room Unboxed podcast.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I love having this conversation. I always love this podcast. It's always great to have great conversations with our guests. But I agree with what you said. I hope it allows our listeners to dive deep into the conceptions of history. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Thick Descriptions, Elephant in the Room Unboxed. Want to learn more about us, what we're doing to disrupt traditional educational methods? Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok. thickdescriptions.org, 405-397-0584.